In your life.
We're good?
We're good.
All right, here we are. This is actually our third take, so we got to be honest because I was rambling on too much. We are live. We are now live from Willowdale. It's not quite 30 Rock, and I'm not Jimmy Fallon. But we're live from Studio Khalid in downtown Willowdale. Woo! Willowdale and Bishop Avenue, where the subway parking lot ends. For some of you who are from Willowdale, basically Willowdale Avenue and Finch. Yeah, Willowdale is what it is. You know, there are a lot of great people from Willowdale. Howie Mandel, Rush, they're all from Willowdale. Willowdale's produced a lot of great people. So don't dismiss Willowdale. And that's where I grew up. Anyways, tonight's topic, the Syrian refugee crisis. And I'll talk a bit about TIFF because I think, yeah. But let's talk about actually a very serious topic. I thought the refugee crisis has been going on for a couple of years, and all of a sudden, because of a poor kid that washed up on the shore, on a Turkish shore, who was, you know, and of course we know if things had worked out, he could have been living in Vancouver. But I thought the coverage of that was so over the top and so overly emotive, and so, you know, I just hate when the media exploits something like a poor kid washing up on a shore, and it just goes worldwide, and of course the Canadian media goes nuts, and it's the middle of an election campaign here, and I just thought it's sort of, my friend Andrew said, it's sort of orchestrated outrage, because the media tells us we have to be outraged. Well, of course it's outrageous, but this has been going on for a couple of years. It just takes a cute small kid washing up on a shore, and everyone goes nuts, right? And of course, everybody who's watching this knows the world's full of tragedy. Okay, we have tragedy in Canada all the time. You're walking over homeless people all the time. We have, you know, Aboriginal women, you know, washing up on the Red River in Winnipeg. You know, like, come on. Tragedy is everywhere, but this is the cause du jour, and the media all of a sudden goes nuts about it, and the opposition, because it's an election campaign, jumps on the bandwagon. But I gotta tell you, I credit Stephen Harper, and I don't credit him for much, but he was unflappable. He was unflappable, and he stuck to the message, and he didn't get caught up in the headlines, and he didn't all of a sudden renounce, oh, we're going to take in 30,000 refugees. He stuck to his message, and I gotta admire him for that. It reminds me of Pierre Trudeau, reason over passion. Reason over passion. You don't get a motive. You know there's a problem here, but you're not going to go off message just because the headlines tell you to go off message. And I gotta tell you, I admire him for that. Now, saying that, I do think that obviously Canada should do more, and obviously we could take in 50,000 refugees from Syria and the region. No question. I mean, this country can absorb that. There's all sorts of private sponsorships too that people want to bring in people, so no question. So the Harper policy is wrong, no question. It's just, I'm only giving him credit for, during an election campaign, he just didn't jump on the emotive bandwagon with the headlines, these crazy big headlines in the Toronto Star and elsewhere, and the media going nuts about this. I kind of admire that. And it's easy for the opposition party to jump on the bandwagon, as they did to a point, but not crazily, but they did to a point, because it's certainly something that touches Canadians, and we did bring in tons of people in the late 70s, basically refugees from the Vietnam War. You know, the boat people, I don't like to call them the boat people, they were basically the refugees from the Vietnam War, and what was going on in China. And the Joe Clark government did it, and other governments have done it, and Harper is definitely is sort of, others have done it. His conservative colleagues have done it. He needs to do it, and he will do it, I'm sure. It's just that he was smart. I don't go off message. I'm not going to let the media headlines direct Canadian policy. And even though there was international outrage at the fact that Canada had denied, this poor kid ended up with a Turkish shore party because Canada denied entry to his family. So, but I respect someone who doesn't go off message and doesn't get caught up in the headlines and doesn't jump on the emotive bandwagon and the orchestrated outrage, which the media tends to do. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't do more. And Joe Clark did a lot in his short-lived government. Flora MacDonald, God bless her soul, she just died. She was a great person. We brought in a lot of refugees from Indochina. Canada's always been good. Since we weren't great in the Second World War, don't forget we denied all these Jewish refugee boats. We don't have a great, let's not. But since the Second World War, Canada hasn't been bad. Okay, I'm not going to belabor this because we want to keep this thing short. Okay, Harper talks about the refugee crisis in Syria. He talks about ISIS. ISIS comes out of a political vacuum. They're not this huge threat to the world that the media plays it out to be. They're a bunch of thugs. They're a bunch of thugs with guns. Okay. And it comes out of a political vacuum created by the Syrian civil war and the disintegration of Iraq. Let's face it, the borders that were set up after the borders that were set up after the First World War are now gone. They're disintegrating. They were artificial borders. The First World War happened. The Ottoman Empire collapsed, and all these artificial borders were created, and now they're gone. Iraq is done. Syria is done. These countries don't exist anymore. Let's just recognize that. You can't bring Humpty Dumpty fell, and you can't bring it back together again. The Kurds will get their own state. They basically have their own state. They should have had their own state, and now it's pretty much done. What happens to Iraq and Syria is we don't know, but rather, okay, so Peter Personbridge was doing all these interviews this week. I call him Peter Personbridge, Mansbridge, Peter Personbridge. I like to use the non-sexist term, so I say Peter Personbridge. He was doing all these things on the CBC, but he was confronting the leaders of, particularly the NDP and the Liberals, about how do you degrade ISIS? How do you degrade ISIS? And it was like sort of like, how do you degrade the Nazi threat? Well, there's no Nazi threat. ISIS is a bunch of thugs. They're no different than the Mexican drug gangs in northern Mexico. They're just a bunch of thugs. They're hardly a threat to the world. And none of the leaders, they're almost scared because everyone has to be against ISIS. You know how you degrade ISIS? You create a political settlement in the region, and ISIS will disappear. The drug war in northern Mexico is a different story, and I'm not going to deal with that tonight. But ISIS will disappear if you have a political settlement. So you know what? Harper won't do this because he's incapable of doing it. But what Mulcair and Trudeau should do if they get into power is you host an international summit in Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Winnipeg, whatever. You invite all the leaders, the Iranians, the Saudis, the Israelis, everyone who has an interest, the Americans, of course, all the European powers, the Russians, of course, and you have an international summit, and you say, okay, how do we deal with this new post, this new 100 years after the First World War? How do we deal with the new Middle East? How do we deal with creating a new order in the Middle East? How do you deal with that? A political settlement is the only way to go, and you got to invite all the players, and that's the way to go. And then ISIS will disappear, because once there's a new settlement, a new order, ISIS will disappear. And it's so funny though that Trudeau and Mulcair are so scared to deal with this. It doesn't take a lot of thinking. Yes, and military solutions don't work, and everyone agrees that Canada's contribution to the bombing ISIS is minimal and not doing a lot. It's so minimal, but it's costing us a lot of money. $500 million in the last year. $500 million. And we're really not doing a lot. We could do a lot better by just settling more refugees and maybe working on the political level and inviting all the players, including Bashar al-Assad, Putin, the Iranians, the Saudis, the Israelis, the Americans, obviously the Americans, because they pretty much run things, and the Europeans, the Turks. And then let's get a settlement. Have a big summit. Have it in Ottawa. Have it in Montreal. Have it in Toronto. Anyways, yeah, that's enough about that. Yes, we can settle more refugees. I don't like people jumping on the bandwagon. And Harper, I think, as much as I disagree with his policies in the Middle East and on the whole of this, yeah, at least he didn't jump on the bandwagon, and I admire that. And I do think obviously things are going to happen. Even under the Harper regime, things are happening. I'm sure they're going to do something, but they'll do it under the radar because they don't want to be seen as capitulating. But I think there'll be a new government in Ottawa on October 20th, and then we can really ramp things up, accepting more refugees, maybe doing more stuff on the diplomatic front. And I think Canada would be a great place to host a big summit on all of this. And let's 100 years since pretty much in the end of the Second World War, First World War. I mean, 100 years pretty much since all those borders in the Middle East were drawn, lines in the sand. That's 1918. So yeah, it's 2000. Well, it's not quite 100 years, obviously, but you know what I'm saying. Let's read there's a new Middle East emerging, and the old borders that were set up, 97 or almost 100 years ago are disintegrated, and Iraq is done, and Syria is done. So, okay, so I don't know what more to say on that, but the thing is,
about sensationalizing a story.
Yes, this is about sensationalizing a human tragedy, and the media has been horrible on this, and there's so much tragedy in the world, and yes, this is one of them, and we have so much tragedy in our own country, and today at College Park, there are a couple of homeless guys walking in the subway, and all these people are rushing off to go to Ryerson to see the new TIFF gala, and you're stumbling over homeless people. And that brings me to the next subject. But yeah, Canada has a lot of tragedy. Yeah, like I said, there are Aboriginal women washing up on the shores of the Red River in Winnipeg, and it just goes under the radar or some media. But there are no glaring headlines. And there are homeless people in Toronto, there are homeless people in Winnipeg, there are homeless people everywhere, and they just don't get the crap. They just, because it just doesn't play in the media. It's so stop sensationalizing something that's been going on for a long time, that needs to be corrected, needs to be dealt with. And that brings me to people tripping over homeless people to get the newest TIFF gala. The Toronto Film Festival is a sham. It started off as a very hokey sort of Canadian thing, the festival of festivals. And that was a great idea, to bring the best cinema from around the world to Toronto. But then it's for some, and I worked at the LA Times, so I totally get it. It's a festival in itself because of the way it was situated, Toronto geographically situated, because of the timing, September, and all of a sudden it became a festival in its own right. It wasn't just taking festival material from other festivals, it became a festival in its own right. And then it just ballooned into something kind of nutty and crazy. And it became hooray for Hollywood, hooray for Hollywood.
Right.
And this is not a Canadian film festival. This is an American film festival that takes place just north of the border. And it's become an embarrassment, I think. All the media goes nutty about it. oh my God, all these Hollywood A-listers are in Toronto, and we're closing streets down for them, and we're doing this, and we're doing that, and it's sickening. How parochial, how pathetic. I am embarrassed to be a Torontonian, embarrassed to be Canadian. I mean, this is silly. Oh, so this, okay, the Toronto Star had an editorial yesterday about who's in town and how great this is, the glamour, and oh my God, Johnny Depp is in town, and Matt Damon, and Rachel McAdams, and Jake Gyllenhaal, and Kate Winslet, and blah blah blah, and Jesse Eisenberg, and we should be so thrilled these people would honor us with their presence. And I think, what a parochial, provincial city this still is. What a parochial, provincial newspaper the Toronto Star still is. I mean, come on. They're going back to the migrant crisis, and I'm going back and forth here, but the Star still wants the Olympics. Yes, we have to settle migrants, and we have to get them into Toronto, but let's spend $20 billion to make us a world-class city. Let's spend $20 billion to get the Olympics and make us a world-class city. And yes, let's just because we need to be world-class. So all these Hollywood A-listers that are in Toronto this week that's going to make us a world-class city. We need to be a world-class city. And I'm thinking, this is disgraceful. This is embarrassing. Like, come on. Like, Toronto's a very low. It's rated by everybody in the world, The Economist magazine and so many other magazines, as one of the most livable places on the world. Most livable places in the world. We don't need Jake Gyllenhaal, Matt Damon, and all these people to tell us this is a livable city. Okay, they come from places that are not that livable, and and why are we closing street? Why is King Street closed for 3-4 days? Why are we inconveniencing all the people that live in this city? So a bunch of Hollywood A-listers can have their whatever, and then there's the whole thing at the Toronto Film Festival. So this thing exists because of indentured slavery. You got thousands of volunteers in their stupid orange shirts, and they're treated like dirt, because I was a volunteer for a while. I swallowed the Kool-Aid for a while. And you get treated like crap. You're told to do this, do that. You get treated like kindergarten children. And the volunteer captains all wanted to be cops, and they obviously didn't make it. So they're volunteer captains at TIFF. And you get treated like absolute dirt. You can't show up 2 minutes late for your shift. You're going to be sent home. You'll get a detention. Oh God, the thing is a joke, right? But of course, the volunteers get involved because they want to be able to have a glimpse of Matt Damon. Oh my God, Jake Gyllenhaal, like, come on. It's so pathetic. If I was an alien looking at the world and I see all these idiots with their smartphones and, wanting to get pictures of multi-billion-dollar Hollywood stars when half of them are working for, people taking the pictures are working for minimum wage, I think, what kind of nutty world is this? Anyways, I think TIFF is a joke. It does pay for itself. It's not like the Olympics. Taxpayers aren't on the hook for that. You got public money, but yes, the money gets pumped back into the local economy. So yeah, you can't fault them for that. I mean, but yeah, the whole thing about why Toronto has to go gaga for an American film festival that just takes place here is silly. There's no there's a bit of Canadian content, obviously, but there's not. It's silly. The ticket prices it's who can afford to go, and it's an elite festival, and it's I could go on and on. I volunteer for it, but I'm not going to go on. I'm not going to go on and on about my experiences as a volunteer, but I'll tell you, a film fest. Why a film fest? They shouldn't be proud when a film festival depends on thousands of unpaid labor. So, all these Hollywood A-listers can have a great time, and they're all multimillionaires. Hey, it's stupid. And we close streets off. The media goes gaga, gaga, gaga. The worst offenders, of course, are the CBC, the public broadcaster, also the biggest supporter of the Olympics and all that crap. It's just outrageous. It goes to show you what a provincial, parochial city we still are, and we want to be world class, but oh my God, you think Paris goes nuts about if Jake Gyllenhaal or Matt Damon are in town? I think New York, obviously, you know, or London. No, only this provincial little burg we live in. TIFF is an embarrassment. It's not something to be celebrated. And I can't believe, but it goes back, and it does. The Olympics and TIFF are related. We want to be world class. That's why I have to have the Olympics. That's why, you know, it's a joke. And I then just, you know, and I saw people say tripping over homeless people to get to the Ryerson Theater for the big gala. Like, oh God, the whole thing is sickening. Just, you know, just think of these Syrian refugees and TIFF and keep it all in perspective. Oh God. And we've gone way over time.
Way over time.
Yeah. And I want to thank one person who watches our videos, Herb Wiseman, who gives a very thoughtful piece on the deficit, and I appreciate your insights. And I do think that running small deficits are a good thing, and I do think Trudeau's policy on this is actually pretty good. But I agree, you can't let deficits go crazy, and it will affect other programs. But small deficits are manageable, especially in a $2 trillion economy, and I think they can benefit a lot of people. Anyways, I appreciate all the people who respond to these videos, and we've tried to do this 3 times tonight, and we'll just let this one go. But the bottom line is, for future, I do think that Canada could help. Bombing ISIS ain't going to work, and Canada should get out of that. A political settlement is something Canada should work on, because that'll definitely stop the stem of refugees, and that'll be good for everybody. And Canada could do that and bring all the players together. Something could be worked out. We should definitely settle 50,000 refugees easily. We can do it easily. But don't get caught up in emotional bandwagons. And I think Harper, I agree. I sort of liked the way he did this week. On the interviews that Peter Personbridge did, I thought, well, Karen Trudeau looked a little too scripted, a little too nervous, and that's unfortunate. Harper looked actually pretty good. Obviously, he's on his way out the door. We all know that. So what I'm even talking about is, about a future government. And in terms of the Olympics, you know, the recent success of the Toronto Blue Jays has contributed far more to the local economy than Pan Am Games ever did. So, and that's something we already subsidized and paid for. So that's overpriced beer under the proverbial bridge. But yeah, the Blue Jays' recent success has contributed far more to the economy of the city than the Pan Am Games ever did. So, no to the Olympics, and of course, everybody knows my opinion on that. And
no to TIFF.
And no to TIFF, even though it gets some public money, but it does pay for itself. But it's sort of why we go gaga, gaga, gaga over an American film festival that just happens to take place north of the border for all the different reasons. And there are lots of reasons for it.
Apologize for the flies.
And the flies are flying around here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I have to admit, I do think TIFF is an embarrassment, frankly. It's not something we should celebrate. The fact that we go crazy over Hollywood A-listers in our city and close roads, and this festival depends on thousands of indentured slavery, and oh God, no, thank you. You know, can't we just be Canadian, be proud of being Canadian in our society and not having, you know, this kind of crap? Oh God, I could go on and on about that, and I'm not going to go on about my experiences with TIFF, but not a positive experience. And there's a whole book to be written about the dark side of the Toronto Film Festival that you won't read in the Toronto Star or in any other media. So anyways, that's it. We went way over limit again, but now we're not going to do this again because we went way over a limit. But I think some of you will agree and disagree, but I appreciate all the people that respond.
Okay.